It's been 18 months since I quit my academic job to become a Wall Street sellout.
I'm good with water for now, though. Thank you.
It's his first day on Wall Street. Give him time.
In this video, I'll go through the top differences between an academic job versus one in industry. And the last one is slightly controversial. To be clear, I don't actually work on Wall Street, and I don't actually think I sold out, but this was a comment that someone left in a previous video of mine. They said, "Congrats to the Wall Street sellout." I'm only one person, so my experience is only mine, and a different type of academic role or a different corporate job would be different. Saying industry is really quite broad. But these are trends that I've discussed with my other friends who also left academia and went into totally different roles than mine, and ones where they work for a large company. The first big difference and fear of academics is autonomy and independence. In academia, autonomy is like a well-deserved reward for your intellectual pursuits. Imagine having the freedom to choose your research topics, your methodology, your teaching approaches. It's a realm where in a lot of ways your expertise and your curiosity is your compass. And you have the autonomy to decide what you think is the best way forward. It's not like you could do a PhD in human resources and then decide to study neurotransmitters, or you can publish in one area and then pivot to do whatever you want. Your choices are still constrained by your experience and expertise, the job you were hired for within your department, and what's being published in your field. Because there are trends and you do have to publish to keep your job, but you have flexibility within the realm of what's real and expected of you. Unlike some corporate structures, academia often operates with a flatter hierarchy. So yes, there's still structure, but there's more of an emphasis on expertise. The hierarchical barriers are more porous, and collaborations and interactions are more heavily rewarded. Even as I'm saying that, I know that I'm painting a very romanticized version of academia, but the hierarchy thing is hard to explain. I think what it boils down to is that when you're in academia, your specialty is yours. And the person who is in charge of you, like your head of school or dean or department head, won't have the exact same specialty. They'll be in your broad field, but because your PhD, and at least to get a PhD in the UK or USA or Canada, has to make a unique contribution to research, you add something that others don't. You are the expert in your field, and that's more or less understood in the academy. Now, let's talk corporate. It's not that there's no autonomy in the corporate world, but it's different.
I'm trying to get some closure on that.
I think the reason you have less autonomy in corporations overall is twofold. One, they expect you to be accessible to do more things, and there's more of a culture of tracking your time with things like being on Teams or Slack or whatever program you might use. Whereas in academia, that isn't really a cultural standard. The dean isn't watching to see if your little Teams icon goes on away, and there's much less of a meetings indicate productivity mentality. So while there's still a productivity and output expectation that's aligned in similar ways to the corporate world, in terms of how you spend your time every day, that's definitely different. But I think this is changing, and in any modern company, there should be ways to bring your working style into how you contribute within your role. And I would recommend that you have these discussions with your team, because it's likely they hired you knowing you might have a different approach, and you might be more likely to spend more time deep thinking or not have meetings as often, and there's ways for you to adapt the existing culture. So try to find ways to mix the two and role model an option that's somewhere between the autonomy of academia, where you can do pretty much whatever you want, where you want, and that of a hierarchical organization. Another example of how the lack of autonomy manifests in organizations is in the decision-making funnels. Decisions in the corporate world often flow through established channels that involve multiple layers of approval. While this structure ensures accountability, it can also slow down the decision-making process and limit your ability to make immediate and impactful choices, which can be frustrating, especially if you're used to academia.
Please say yes!
You don't need permission from us to build bunk beds. You're adults. You can do what you want.
So...
And I'm sure I'm going to get an academic thinking, what is she talking about? We have to go through so much red tape and bureaucracy and all of that. And I would say, yes, you do. And with admin and things like that and peer review and all of that with processes in academia, but there's also equivalent in industry. So depending on where you work, it kind of comes out as a draw in terms of the bureaucratic nature of the work. Then the second reason that I think there tends to be less autonomy is because in industry, there's so many things that have to be navigated because of the nature of corporate work. So I'm not saying that organizations don't do this right, but there are things like various components at play. So corporate policies, team objectives, strategic goals, client demands, stakeholder demands, market trends, personal team goals. Whereas in academia, it's a bit more relaxed. Very few heads of department are going to say, no, don't publish that paper because it's not aligned with our vision. In terms of autonomy, academia takes this one. The second difference is about performance metrics and progression. This is where it gets a bit bumpy because academia as a field is so different and broad depending on where you live and where you work. Overall, in academia, the metrics of success are often intertwined with the pursuit of knowledge. Publications, research impact, and contributions to the academic community are key indicators of success. Publications are the currency in which academics trade, but success is still largely measured by quality and not just quantity. Now, that said, I was at a business school, and publishing, for example, one 4-star or high-ranking journal article a year would be the markings of a very successful academic. There's also expectations in terms of fundings and things like that. Whereas in the natural sciences, you'd publish much more than that. And that can be decided by field and influenced by the number of volumes journals publish each year and the research requirements and whatnot. It definitely differs in terms of what's successful, but you are still largely measured by the quality of your ideas and how well those ideas are received by your professional peers, either through the review process or through grant funding or sometimes through teaching, depending on the role. In the corporate sphere, the bottom line takes center stage. So performance metrics here are frequently tied to tangible outcomes, efficiency, and the financial health of the organization. But they're also often less tangible for individuals. This is where I can see a lot of academics getting very frustrated if they make the switch. While it might seem like reviewers are often unfair and that the corporate world has a greater emphasis on quantifiable results like targets and deadlines and measurable achievements, you might not agree with or even be clear on what they're measuring. That's why I say that it's tangible for the organization, but it might not be tangible for you. It can be a bit cloudier, and depending on where you work, you might not get actionable feedback. So you have to be really clear on your objectives, which is really difficult to do when you're just starting out in a new role. So that's looked at the difference in the metrics, but when we talk about actual progression, I think it's clearer in academia. I do not think it's easier. But if you start as a lecturer, you'll go to an assistant professor, and then you get tenure, and then whatever is next, right? Whereas not all corporate structures or corporate roles work that way. Not every role will have a clear, more senior role. So you might get a new job as, let's say, an analyst, and then realize that there are no senior analysts in your team. So your only option is to either wait for your boss to leave, and then there's 5 other analysts vying for that position, or do a different role, or go to a different team.
Name? Dwight Schrute. Thank you, Mr. Schnute. We will let you know.
It's not always clear. In terms of progression, I think this one also goes to academia because of clarity, but not because it's easy. Speaking of doing something that is easy, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I make videos about productivity and not just academia versus industry, but I've got more videos coming up soon. The next one is going to be about how I'm figuring out what to do with my life in a very normal way. So the third difference is the actual work and the feelings that you add value. By far, I prefer work in the corporate environment and feel I can add more value overall. And this is where I get a bit controversial. I do not think I added value in academia, and I do not feel like a sellout. I felt like a sellout as an academic. Even though, yes, I have literally doubled my salary since my first academic role, that has to be a point for the corporate world. In this economy. On one of my videos, I got a comment saying that I just didn't understand academia because it's about the pursuit of knowledge and shaping the minds of tomorrow. And listen, I get it. I used to believe that academia was one of the best jobs in the world because it was about creating knowledge. And for some people, I still believe that. But I wasn't good enough to be one of those people. And I never would have been, and very few people are. But now in a corporate role, I get to contribute fully to other people and their goals. I have more time to absorb and share knowledge, like through YouTube, and I have the time to contribute to my community, and I have enough money to actually pay for things that are my hobbies. Also, I think academia is changing, and I saw so many people trying to finagle their way into publications that didn't really add anything. It was like making a few tweaks to some theoretical contribution or some component of the research, knowing that only the reviewers would ever really read that paper, or a small handful. So it wasn't really about contributing to knowledge, it was just about ticking that publication box. And again, this might be controversial, but as a lecturer, I was so tight on time and there was such a focus on publishing in academia that being a good teacher wasn't actually that respected. And I wasn't able to support students in the way that I wanted to. So I felt like I was selling out to be this ideal academic, and it was impossible for me to achieve that. I definitely enjoyed teaching and I do miss it. But as the years went on, I also realized that students were less and less interested in learning and more interested in getting good grades. And in fairness to them, that's all that mattered, so I do get it, but it kind of felt like they were just trying to trick the system as opposed to actually learn things. The academic system is kind of changing a bit as well, where students are becoming more like customers, and the entire academic student contract was just different than what I thought it was going to be. I don't think I sold out by leaving. If anything, I make more of a contribution now to young people and people early in their careers as a mentor and as someone who can run mentor programs than I ever would have in academia. Another point for the corporate life. It looks like they're tied, which seems fitting because there's things that I miss and parts that I enjoy. I have no regrets and I've never thought about going back. Are you in academia or in a corporate role? If so, leave a comment and let me know if you've experienced any of these differences or if there's something that I've forgotten or not added. I'd love to see how your experience compares to what I've said. Subscribe for my next video about how I'm figuring out what to do with my life as a normal person who is not successful yet. Thanks for watching. I'm Cheryl. I have a PhD in organizational behavior and I tend to talk about careers and stuff.